Investors are probably unaware of the full strategic potential of Nvidia's recent $2 billion investment in Marvell technology. This action marks a significant milestone in Nvidia's quiet transition from a GPU powerhouse to a full-fledged artificial intelligence (AI) system builder. Nvidia's investment in Marvell indicates a deeper blueprint. Nvidia is integrating the complete assembly line for AI factories, computing, data pipelines, and orchestration under one roof, despite Wall Street's continued perception of the business as a seller of compute engines. Marvell serves as a stand-in for the missing nervous system that unites disparate GPU clusters into a functional AI infrastructure. As a result, no semiconductor competitor is able to replicate Nvidia's vertically integrated architecture at the same rate of scale. The hard work in AI training and inference clusters is done by GPUs. Although this architecture is functional, it is also constrained by non-visible hardware. Storage must feed models without creating a bottleneck, power supply must be controlled at rack scale, and data workloads must transfer between chipsets with minimal latency. These invisible layers are Marvell's area of expertise. High-speed Ethernet fabrics, sophisticated signal integrity, and clever storage controllers are all part of the company's ecosystem. Every Blackwell or future Rubin system can come with pre-optimized networking and storage that already speaks fluent CUDA, thanks to the integration of Marvell's technology with Nvidia's reference designs. It is no longer necessary for developers to put dissimilar parts together and hope that they work together. When Nvidia and Marvell work together, coherence becomes the new AI infrastructure performance multiplier. Domain-specific silicon is more appropriate for some AI applications. However, Nvidia's focus on adaptable, general-purpose GPUs would be slowed if all potential ASICs were designed internally. Nvidia has a partner who already understands the language of parallel workloads thanks to Marvell's proficiency in bespoke silicon, especially in networking ASICs and high-bandwidth memory interfaces. In essence, Nvidia and Marvell are co-creating accelerators that work natively with GPUs, such as memory fabric chips that handle HBM as a programmable resource, low-power edge nodes, and specialized inference engines. The GPU king successfully obtains priority access and intellectual property (IP) alignment that generic suppliers cannot match because Nvidia actually invested in Marvell and thus owns ownership in the business. Nvidia is not outsourcing its aspirations for proprietary silicon. Instead, the business is actively allocating funds to manage co-creation procedures. It is no longer necessary for hyperscalers and countries developing AI infrastructure to patch together systems from rival manufacturers. Now that Marvell is involved, Nvidia eliminates a crucial factor in realizing its goal of converting AI factories into a single independent platform. Pre-validated, energy-optimized Nvidia Marvell stacks that can be scaled from a single rack to an exascale campus are available to customers. Nvidia is currently the only company that offers a complete blueprint in a time when businesses and governments desire to own their intelligence stacks. Nvidia gave Marvell more than just a financial windfall. The $2 billion investment is a down payment toward a silicon-based, impregnable moat. Marvell recently emerged as a key component, transforming Nvidia's GPUs into an inference-era operating system. The true game-changer that Nvidia recently unlocked is that reliable compute, predictable latency, and a total cost of infrastructure ownership that rivals cannot match are measurable results that the corporation can start offering instead of data center components. In terms of AI chips, Nvidia is still the clear heavyweight champion, and CEO Jensen Huang appears prepared to keep outperforming rivals. Given that some of its competitors in the Magnificent Seven invest hundreds of billions of dollars in initiatives, including the development of their own AI chips, it is difficult to determine how much of a lead Nvidia actually has. While some people, like Andrew Left of Citron Research, point to Amazon as a legitimate rival to Nvidia in AI chips, I wouldn't sleep on Alphabet and Google TPUs, tensor processing units, which I believe have the potential to capture a sizable portion of the market, particularly as the rapidly expanding Google Cloud Platform, GCP, seeks to accelerate AI-driven growth. In any case, a significant silicon battle is taking place, and it appears like Nvidia will need to continue dominating it if it hopes to maintain a comfortable lead over its numerous allies and competitors in mega-cap technology. I mentioned in a previous video that Alphabet has what it takes to reach the $5 trillion market cap benchmark, possibly before Nvidia has another opportunity to do it. Alphabet, the parent company of Google, appears to have potential cash cows in the making, but Google itself appears to be a master at monetizing new technology. Above all, Waymo is the game changer that could be the major AI monetizer that Wall Street and the market have yet to price in. Beyond that, though, I believe that Google's massive capital expenditures will increase the share-taking capability of its TPUs. The $5 trillion question is still how much of the AI chip market TPUs can capture over the next 5 years. With $1 trillion in sales of Blackwell and Rubin anticipated by the end of next year, Nvidia will continue to profit from the AI growth in the interim. For the other gamers who joined the custom silicon conversation, what does that mean? It's difficult to predict, but if the silicon spenders keep making significant investments in the project, I do believe that the race may eventually become much more fascinating. My prediction is that the race for AI chips will get closer in 2028 and the 2030s. In any event, a few weeks ago, Google's TurboQuant algorithm produced a significant improvement in memory efficiency. It was large enough to have a significant impact on memory chip manufacturers. It turns out that many boats in the AI waters, including the memory chip manufacturers themselves, benefit from such a breakthrough. I believe it would be a mistake to undervalue the kind of revolutionary advancements a company capable of delivering that kind of efficiency shock could make in the field of AI chips. I believe that efficiency and low costs will start to accelerate in the race for AI chips as agents drive a sort of inference boom. And since Google has already shown that it can make things incredibly more efficient, I believe it should be trading at a far higher premium. I believe Google may develop into one of Nvidia's biggest competitors in the future because the Ironwood TPU generation is already impressing with efficiency advantages for the age of inference, and several other significant spenders, notably Anthropic, have given Google's silicon a big vote of confidence. Nvidia has been improving its position in inference by taking all the necessary steps. Don't forget to share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Your input helps create a more knowledgeable community where we can all learn and grow together in the world of investing. Stay up to date with the latest market trends, insights, and key updates by subscribing to Investing Tutorial. We're here to help you make smarter investment decisions and stay ahead of the curve.
After the ceasefire was announced, I think, last week, and it looked like at least a deceleration. You said the lows were in.
Yep.
And now this is unclear whether
unclear,
we're in a ceasefire. You still think the lows are in?
Still, the March 30th low, I think, was it for this pullback. It turned out to be a correction for the NASDAQ, but not for the S&P 500. But, the earnings season is up ahead here, and I think it's going to confirm that the earnings story is remarkably resilient. The economy has been remarkably resilient. I mean, we've had some weak numbers, but I think a lot of that, I blame the weather. We had some pretty nasty weather in January and February.
And the weather in Congress?
And the weather in Congress, of course.
Because of the shutdown?
Yeah, you do a good job of reporting on that, of course. But all in all, I think the economy is going to handle this pretty well. And I'm actually impressed by the resilience of the financial markets. I mean, especially with the announcement of the blockade of the Iranian ports. The reaction so far has been pretty muted.
Who would have thought? I mean, who would have thought the headline would be, okay, we're going to blockade the Strait of Hormuz? Do people just not believe that's going to happen? Why is there, at this point, why is it a total shrug?
Well, I think we have some experience, even recent experience with these kind of events. Geopolitical crises tend to be buying opportunities, and we saw that last year when we had the whole tariff issue.
Mm-hmm.
We had a bear market in 2022, no recession, but it only lasted 9 months and turned out to be a great buying opportunity. So the problem, it's not really a problem, but everybody knows that geopolitical crises are buying opportunities. So when we get one, they're like, buying on the dip.
Yeah, we need to shake that conviction and make you think, well, this time it's not going to be.
And historically, it's worked.
We have a supply. I saw a map of how many tankers we have around filled with oil. So we have supply here, but the price is set globally. So we're going to feel it at the pump. There's no doubt.
Well, we're going to feel it at the pump, especially because some of these tankers that used to go to the Arabian Gulf are now coming to the United States to get oil. And I think that's why the West Texas Intermediate just recently has jumped above the Brent crude oil price.
Depending on the month, yeah.
Because we're sort of a very reliable source of oil. And so I won't be surprised if we, in fact, do see our exports increase maybe substantially over the next year or so. And that would be a positive for our oil industry for sure.
So where do you see actual inflation? We had inflation numbers on Friday. I keep pointing to core because that's what you're supposed to use because it's volatile. When we always make the joke, nobody eats food, no one drives. Obviously, inflation, the headline number is what we're paying. But the reason they separate it out is because on a monthly basis, it's volatile.
It is volatile, yeah. So
will we get to 5% core?
Well, I think we're going to see a higher core. I mean, the core...
Because it filters through.
I think, we've had this recent anomaly where in the past the CPI inflation rate used to be higher than the consumption deflator rate, which is what the Fed watches.
Right.
And now what we're seeing is the opposite. And the reason for that is rent inflation now is actually coming down substantially, and it's got a huge weight in the CPI, not so much in the so-called PCED deflator. So the Fed follows the PCED deflator, and we are going to see higher inflation, both headline and core. And I think it's more of a problem than the markets are actually anticipating. I think the bond market has been remarkably calm about it.
Just walk us through the big picture on what this all means and the market reaction so far, which seems fairly limited at this point, you could say.
Yeah, given the events, especially the naval blockade of Iranian ports and Iranian ships, that's obviously going to create a little bit of a stir if we do actually see that come to fruition. And I think the market's really discounting that we might see a turnaround here when it comes to the ceasefire talks, maybe some optimism moving forward. We have that New York Post report. We have to obviously have that confirmed by the Iranians to really kind of solidify that and really get a bid off of off that headline, but the market continues to try to move higher. Last night, we actually leveraged that 50-day moving average for the E-mini S&P 500 futures as a key area of support, and that's exactly what you would like to see. We broke above it last week, closed above it, came back, retested it, and now we're trying to move higher. And let's see if we're going to be able to continue to do so, and the news flow is going to have to support that. I think also a different dynamic outside of the geopolitical risk, which I know we'll probably talk about a little bit more when it comes to oil, but the fact that software is actually catching a bid. If you look at Microsoft right now, I'm not seeing any other headlines outside of the Cloudflare report that we saw this morning from OpenAI, but Microsoft is up about 1.6%, moving very aggressively over the last 2 minutes, 3 minutes or so. And you are seeing ServiceNow as well as the other software names catching a pretty sustainable bid. So maybe some buyers are stepping in because those have been aggressively oversold. That could also create a little bit more of a tailwind for this market. So a lot when it comes to news headlines. I still think that there's a perceived risk out there that's probably being underpriced on the energy front, Sam. But at the end of the day, the market's trying to look past that and look a little bit more optimistic as to the future. Let's see if that's going to actually hold here.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to see software's catching a bid after that beatdown last week. I mean, you had Dan Ives kicking the week off with a note saying another turbulent week ahead for markets. Focus on tech winners. Now, he says are on sale. He does say his favorite names are some of the cybersecurity players, CrowdStrike, Palo Alto, but he also talks about Microsoft, Salesforce, and ServiceNow as really standouts that have been very disconnected sell-offs relative to the AI monetization story. So catching a bid this morning, as you mentioned, but let's just talk about the big picture on oil. I mean, what do we know about this blockade? Because obviously we are waiting for a little bit more of an update here. I think it's really telling that the markets are reacting the way that they are this morning, KG, perhaps off the fact that Trump did say the meeting went well. I mean, he says that there were points that were agreed to. So let's wait and see. But I'm just wondering, what it means for Iran's onshore crude storage. I was reading about how they have 13 days before it fills up. How much damage could that potentially inflict there on what has been really an economic lifeline? And then a lot of the chatter this morning around how maybe this is a way to get to China.
Yeah, China is definitely going to be the impact, and that's probably what's being underpriced at this point. Obviously, seeing flows from the Strait of Hormuz back and forth from Iran, going to China, going to India. That's another one to keep your eye out on here. We do see a disruption that could cause a little bit of pressure on the global landscape, especially when you're looking at the logistics here, which we still are seeing a major problem, especially with the amount of crude oil that's being taken offline. If we see a full-on blockade by the U.S. on these Iranian ships, you could make the case that maybe 1 million million and potentially 2 million barrels per day are then going to be constrained in the Asia-Pacific markets, which will be a problem. But maybe this also does force Iran to come back to the table. If you remember a couple of weeks ago, everybody was talking about Karg Island and how that could be a strategic point. But at the end of the day, Sam, you can have as much oil as you want at a particular location, but if you cannot transport it, then it's no good in the market. So this is actually a very strategic move when you're looking at the naval blockade. If this is going to go through, there's definitely some perceived risk here, but it makes it a little bit more flexible for the administration or the U.S. to be able to try to manage these ships and really constrain Iranian crude oil flows, and that will have an impact. I think the cross current that we will see and we'll recognize, and I'm not sure if everybody's pricing this in, is what's the retaliation going to come from, let's say, China or even India, if they do see this bottleneck actually take hold here. And there could be some other fallout for that, but the market's not pricing that in. At least the equity market is not. I think the energy market, if you're looking at crude, is still kind of pricing in a heftier premium, which is another reason why we're seeing crude oil, WTI, move a little bit more aggressively than Brent. So a lot that is out there. If we see a full-on blockade and nothing moves through the strait, unfortunately, from a global economic standpoint, it would definitely cause some pain here. I think the administration's taking that risk to say maybe short-term pain is going to bring the Iranians back to the table. They can have a resolution here. We'll see if that actually happens, though.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the story over the last 24 hours had been the fact that there had been some reporting around the fact that China had been supplying arms to Iran off the back of this. China now coming out and denying that. You've then had President Trump coming out and saying that China will be hit with a 50% tariff if they do help Iran, which obviously Beijing's not impressed by either. You just wonder, I mean, this is sort of the tone going into what is going to be a very high-stakes meeting between President Xi and Trump next month. And it comes off the back of a week where Trump had been sort of suggesting that maybe China had played some sort of role in Iran coming to the table last week. So, I mean, you know, it's a very confusing situation. What does it mean right now, though, I suppose, if you're talking about a blockade, you know, physical market impact right now on oil, do you think, KG?
Well, yeah, it's a big problem. I mean, if you're looking at European spot markets right now for oil, it's trading at $150. If you're looking at the actual physical market. And so there's still a major disconnect here. And it makes it harder for a lot of these energy companies to hedge as well. We'll probably see that impact, not in this quarter's earnings, but maybe their guidance moving forward or their next the next earnings announcement. And then you are seeing this rerouting of ships to whoever's the highest bidder. So you have some destinations that are may have been planned a month ago, 2 months ago. You see those ships now saying, well, hey, I can go and sell this over to the European markets for a $15 premium per barrel. And those ships are rerouting. So this is causing a logistical problem as well. And I would not be surprised, Sam, if you actually do see over the long term, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months down the road, that you actually do see one of these major players like India or China actually become the hub for a lot of the energy flows from Iran, or basically laundering Iranian oil. And that's something that's not out of the norm. We saw the same situation happen with the Russia-Ukraine conflict, where India actually started exporting more than it imported, and India is not an energy producer at all. So the numbers really didn't add up. That's because they were obviously moving that dark fleet oil to the international markets. That probably will happen in this type of respect as well. I think the last thing that we have to also keep in mind here is the fact that we are seeing the cooking oil aspect within India is really impacting their economy. And a lot of that LPG, or a lot of the tankers, have been actually moving LPG, or liquefied petroleum gas, not really crude oil. So that would actually put a little bit more pressure on their economy as well. So a lot of dynamics taking place here. We'll see how everything kind of shakes out. Market's trying to be as optimistic as possible. If you're looking at these red lines between the U.S. and Iran, it's not only just the enriched uranium, it's the ballistic missile program. There's a lot of different items that probably did not get resolved over the weekend. And I think that probably gives us a little bit more heightened volatility here in the back end that we still have to be mindful of. And I'm not sure if we're in the all clear yet.